welcome to the Autism Intervention Training video series. In this video, we will define and give some examples of different types of products. We will define prompt hierarchies and explain how to use them. We will also discuss the importance of systematically removing the prompts, prompt fading. Let's begin by defining what a prompt is. Prompts are stimuli presented to ensure the occurrence of a response. In other words, prompts are cues that an instructor can use to make sure a child succeeds at a task. For example, when teaching a child to do a puzzle to put together Mr. Potato Head, the therapist can tap the correct space with a finger. This prompts the child to place a piece in the correct place. When teaching a child to brush his teeth, the therapist might physically guide the child's hand through the motion. This ensures that the child performs the correct action of brushing a teeth. The variety of product is almost endless. We will discuss the one used most frequently. Let's begin with physical prompts. With physical prompts, the therapist physically moves the child to make the correct response. One common physical prompt is a hand-over-hand prompt. With hand-over-hand prompting, a therapist holds the child's hand and guides the child towards the correct response. For example, the therapist could guide the child's hand to show him how to put a lace through the correct hole and how to write a letter. All these involves a lot of physical support. So we notice that the therapists very closely work with the child for such prompts. So when the instructions are given by modeling, children find it very easy to follow. Let's understand another prompt, which is modeling the correct response. With modeling, the therapist acts out the response. This ensures that the child observes the response being done correctly. Modeling prompts. For example, when teaching a child to play feed a doll, you could model feeding a doll to the child before asking the child to feed a doll. So once it is done very closely, the child observes and then starts to feed a doll herself. Note, in this example, the therapist also used some physical prompts. Here is an example of the therapist using modeling prompt with block building. So the therapist is first assigning the job to the child and then demonstrating how to do it, and finally encouraging the child for achieving the kind of the result expected, and child feels good repeating the action as explained by the therapist. Very well done. That is amazing. Gestural prompts. Gestures are another type of prompts. Gesture include pointing towards, looking at, or otherwise gesturing to indicate a correct response. For example, when asking a child to touch a yellow card, you could tap the correct card. Visual prompts. Visual prompts use visual information to give the child a clue about the correct response. For example, you might hold up a picture of a question mark to prompt the child to ask you a question. There is a bubble in the room. Note the therapist. Question mark towards the camera so we could see it, but she would not normally present in such an awkward manner. Positional prompts. Positional prompts involve positioning the teaching material in a way that increases the chances that the child will respond correctly. For example, you could place a cue card with the correct response closer to the child than any of the other cards. Keegan, can you give me all the animals? In this example, the therapist placed all the animals close to the child and all the other pictures on her side of the table. Last, verbal prompts refers to any vocal cues you might give to the child. There are many different types of verbal prompts. For example, you could use a direct echo prompt. While playing, you might say the word you want the child to say it. Or when using questions, you might ask the child a question and then immediately say the correct answer. The child echoes you to get the correct.
Good. Nice work. There you go. Table first, then we can play. That's nice. Good boy. What's your name? What's your name? Carter. Carter. Good boy. What's your name? Carter. You got it. Nice work. What does a horse say? Neigh. That's it.
Now that we have reviewed some of the different types of products, we can discuss prompt hierarchies. A prompt hierarchy can help you decide what prompt to begin with and when teaching a new skill. It is also useful for planning how to remove prompts as the child begins to acquire new skills. A prompt hierarchy is a list of prompts for teaching a specific skills. The list begins with the prompts that provide the most help to the child and ends with the prompts that provides the least help to the child. Let's imagine that you are going to teach a child how to brush his or her hair. First, you decide an appropriate SD or instruction. Next, you identify a sequence of prompts that's ranging from explicit support to minimal support of the behavior to be taught. The top of the hierarchy might be a physical hand-over-hand prompt where you guide the child's hand as he or she brushes his or her hair. The next level of hierarchy might use the modeling prompt in which you give the SD and then begin brushing your own hair or doll's hair. The next might use of a positional prompt in which you give the SD and place the hairbrush and then an inaccessible position, then point the child's hair. Well, a very minimal prompt will be a pause prompt in which you simply wait for a child to brush following the SD. At the bottom of the hierarchy might be a contextual prompt in which the child is shown a photograph of brushing in the context of a learned sequence such as dressing. When beginning, to start with the lowest level of the prompt is very important. For example, if the child can only brush his or her hair with physical hand prompt, you should begin with the physical prompt. But if the child can complete the task with the visual, you should begin at this level of prompt and so on. As the child requires the skills, you need to remove the prompt by moving down the prompt hierarchy. If you not remove quickly, the child can become dependent on the prompt. Using the prompt hierarchy as a guide for removing prompts help teach children to be able to succeed independently. The technical term for this process of moving down the prompt hierarchy and removing prompts is prompt fading. Let's watch the therapist demonstrate prompt fading.
Wow! You want this? No. Okay. Come. Touch cheeks. Whoa! 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 Touch cheeks. Love it. Oh, no. Want to play? Okay. Touch ears. Whoa! It's all yours!
Notice the last trial, the therapist held her hand at the ready but no longer used to hand over hand prompt. There are two ways to fade prompts using the prompt hierarchy. The first way is to fade the intensity of the prompt within the level of the prompt hierarchy. The second way is to test or probe the child's competence at the next lower level of the prompt hierarchy. With both methods, the goal is to fade prompts as quickly as possible while ensuring maximum success. It would be great if children could be prompted with such accuracy and precision that they never gave an incorrect response. Of course, this goal is unattainable. However, we can try to minimize errors by fading prompts only when we think the child can succeed with a lower intensity or lower level prompt. To fade the intensity of the prompt within a level of the prompt hierarchy, we make it less and less noticeable. For example, when using hand over hand prompts, you can start to apply less pressure gradually, allowing the child to move his or her hand independently. You can fade point prompt in a similar manner by gradually gesturing in smaller and less noticeable ways, or you could feed a verbal prompt by giving less verbal instructions, or by only saying the first syllable of the correct response rather than the whole word. Once you have faded the intensity of the prompt, you can believe that the child can succeed at the next level in that prompt hierarchy. You can probe the child's readiness. You do this by moving down one prompt level in your hierarchy and determining if the child is successful. If the child succeeds, you can stay at the lower level prompt and begin fading towards the next lower level. But if the child does not succeed, you go back up the previous level and prompt where the child was successful.
Yeah. Oh wow, look, you made steps. Give me a high five. More steps. Look, I made steps. I'm not gonna make steps. Can you make steps too? Yeah. Steps. Oh, that's very good, Keegan. Here's your chains. There you go. Look, I built steps. Can you build me some steps? Yeah. On the ball. Oh, it's a good job. Here's your dirt truck. Let's go that truck. Got my truck today. As the mice can say you. Look, Keegan, I built steps. No, it's for use. Can you make me some steps? Yeah. That's perfect. Good job. Here you go. And let's build. He's gonna go home.
We have defined what a prompt is and given examples of some of the more commonly used types of prompts. We discussed prompts hierarchies and demonstrated how they can be used to begin teaching a new task, as well as how they can be used for fading the prompts. As we reach the end of this video, we must emphasize that fading prompt is one of the most important things you need to remember. Therefore, for a very moment you begin using prompts, you should be thinking about how best you can remove them. Thank you.